Hope you enjoyed your lunch. I'm just going to set some context around what this session is about, and I'll do it by way of just sharing some of my comments of last night, that this is a particularly strange time in higher education today. I read the news today about protests happening on campus and people being offended if they don't like what they hear. And what I've said to our students, faculty, staff, trustees, and others is that we as educators in higher ed fail if we don't have our students feel uncomfortable at some time during their time on campus. And at Northwood, we don't cancel events. We encourage debate. We think the greatest diversity is diversity of thought, different perspectives. And in doing that, we think we are preparing mature young people to go out and have an impact on society. How do we do that? On the first day, literally the first day of class, our students received this book. It's called When We Are Free. The foreword is written by Milton Friedman. It is stories about liberty, freedom, private property, personal responsibility, limited government in our life, and it prepares those students for the next 4 years for their time here at Northwood. And by the time they leave here, they're ready to go out with a different kind of view of the world. And how does that manifest itself in terms of the type of student that we produce and what are the outcomes? I'll give you two pieces of data. Number one is Northwood is not the richest. It's not the largest university. This country is blessed with great university. And even though politicians give us a hard time, the world still wants to come to America to learn. That's why you won't hear me say that Northwood is a better university, but I have no trouble in saying it's a distinct and different kind of university. As an example, for someone who's literally traveled the world as a higher education nerd, trying to understand what to make great universities great, my time in the Middle East, up in Kazakhstan, Latin America, Europe, North America, I don't know another university on the planet that has more than a third of its graduates who actually own their own companies. Art and Jason and Mike are just three of those examples. That's data point number one. Number two is I've also researched and written about rankings. I'm not fond of them. I don't think if you can ride a bicycle to school, it should qualify you as being a highly ranked school. But there is one ranking I don't mind referring to. It's one that comes out of Washington, Georgetown University. What they have said is, let's just look at what is the purpose of the university in terms of a lot of students are paying a lot of tuition these days. Many of them and many governments are saying we should underwrite that even more, take more money from the taxpayer to pay for their graduate. And most of that debt, by the way, that students have are graduate schools, not undergraduate schools. And at Northwood, we said, just hang on a minute. It ties back into personal responsibility. What are the programs that you're selecting? Where do you think that's going to take you in the future? So Georgetown University looks at 4,500 different colleges and universities across the country every year and says, where are those graduates in 20 years and 30 years and 40 years in terms of their ROI? The fact that this little university in Midland, Michigan ranks in the top 11% of all universities and colleges in the country in terms of ROI after 30 and 40 years, I think is remarkable. And we believe it's tied in to this entrepreneurial spirit that people can launch their own careers, or as I like to say, every student that comes to Northwood has a heart, a hope, and a dream. And our job is to try to fulfill that and pull it out of them. And so what we want to do here in this session called Leadership Insights, A View from the Helm, that actually comes from a great university president, University of Michigan, James Duderstadt. And he wrote a book in 2007 called A View from the Helm, Leading One of America's Great Universities. And so we took a view from the helm concept and said, let's apply that so we have great speakers come to this institution and share with our students what their view is from the Helm. That's why we're live streaming this today to our students and our trustees and our alumni. And we've had incredible success. We started with Bill Stavropoulos, the two-time CEO of Dow right here in Midland. We've had Chris Clemens, an alumnus of Northwood University, the CFO, Executive Vice President of the Miami Dolphins. He's busy today getting ready for the F1 race in Miami. We've had Secretary DeVos on campus talking about school choice. I'd love to hear perspectives on the changes to Title IX this week. And what we try to do is expose those conversations to the students. But it's an academic exercise, and that's why I'm going to call on my colleague, Don England, Associate Professor of Finance here at Northwood, to set the academic perspective and introduce Dr. Stehauer, who will introduce our guest, Mary Kissel. So we have one of these books for all of our friends of Stevens. It's our Bible that, as I said, every student gets, our speakers. And if anyone else would like to view what do Northwood students read for 4 years, please let us know. We'd love to give you a copy. All of these copies, by the way, are donated by alumni to give back to the next generation of students. And they literally keep them for most of their life. So with that, Dawn, over to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to all who are involved in creating this opportunity. As I began to reflect on some of the topics that might be explored, I began to think, wow, what an amazing opportunity we have today to glean insights from a unique perspective and experience. Thank you. This week, my finance classes are focused on multinational financial management. Whether students are enrolled in asset management or financial management or corporate investment decisions, this week we're exploring the subject from a global perspective. Our discussions began, or usually do begin, on topics related to risks, risk management, and challenges that companies face, which flow into conversations about diversification and more risk, and then innovative solutions from a financial perspective. We then land on what becomes next week's topic of mergers and acquisitions, a fan favorite that we affectionately refer to as M&A. How is M&A related to what we're talking about in our classes? How did we transition so quickly from multinational finance to M&A? Well, if you allow me to, let me ask some questions. You don't need to answer, just think about them and hint some of the information you've been given today might have those answers in it. Do you know the current motivation for M&A activity, or rather the top trending reason? Do you know which sectors are experiencing the most M&A activity? And do you know which country had the greatest number of targets for M&A activity by volume and value over the last 40 years? So warning. I'm going to do to you what I do to my students. I'm not answering the questions. You can go discover them yourselves. They'll remain unanswered for now. Why? Because if you listen closely, you may gain insights or to those questions are not the most important answers that we may need from today's conversation. Rather, another set of questions. After all, good insight and best practices start with the best questions, right? Better yet, when we discover more questions to be asked, it means more to learn and discover. So what questions do you have today? Some questions you think of may be asked audibly and answered. Others may not be asked at all. Others still may go completely unanswered. So I invite you to come up with some questions of your own as you listen. But if you don't, may I propose as we enter this conversation that we ask the whys and the hows. Why was that? Why is it now? How was that? How is it now? How might it be next? Are you ready to discover together? All right. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Kristen Stehauer, Northwood University's Academic Vice President and Provost. She earned her doctorate in political science and international relations at Northwestern University and has completed postgraduate work in higher education at Harvard University. Dr. Stahauer's scholarly work has focused on East-West relations during the Cold War, American foreign policy, and the unification of Germany. Her business career has focused on strategy, formulation, and implementation, and she has worked with large and small organizations, both domestic and global, spanning many sectors. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kristen Stahauer.
Well, thank you, Dawn. I think you can see why she is such a popular professor and how she challenges her students, just to the point that Professor McDonald was mentioning. Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon, both here in Northwood University's McNair Center and also via live streaming for this fireside chat as part of Northwood University Stevens Automotive Forum, a Mergers and Acquisitions and Automotive-Related Investments Forum. Mary Kissel, our guest, is Executive Vice President and Senior Policy Advisor at Stevens, Inc., a Little Rock, Arkansas-based privately held financial services firm where she provides advice on geopolitical risk and macroeconomic trends to clients and the Stevens family. She joined the firm in March 2021. From October 2018 to January 2021, Ms. Kissel served as Senior Advisor to Secretary of State Michael R. Pompeo. In that role, she served as the Secretary's Chief Advisor, conducted special projects on his behalf, played a key role in the reorientation of the U.S.-China relationship, and traveled to more than 60 countries. Prior to her State Department appointment, Ms. Kissel had a long and distinguished career on the Wall Street Journal editorial board, including stints as chief foreign policy writer in New York and Asia Pacific editorial page editor based in Hong Kong. She began her career in the fixed income division of Goldman Sachs in New York and London. Ms. Kissel is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and hosts the Nixon Seminar on Conservative Realism and National Security. She is vice chairman of RXO Inc., a New York Stock Exchange listed transportation solutions company, and serves as a director of the American Australian Council and the Marathon Initiative. Her work has been published in the Wall Street Journal, The Spectator, and the Far Eastern Economic Review, to just name a few. She's appeared on major television and radio networks and podcasts around the world. Ms. Kissel is a graduate of Harvard University and the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Please join me in welcoming Mary Kissel. This is truly a privilege.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So it really is exciting, and not only professionally, but personally, since I've followed your work for many years, given my area of focus as a scholar. And just so you know, too, to the point that Professor England was making, we have cards with QR codes. If you want to scan that, you can ask a question in our Q&A later, either electronically, or we can just do it by voice in the room. So please start thinking about those questions. So let's get rolling. Great. And we're going to get going fast here right out of the chute. When we met in preparation for this session, we decided that the provocative title, The Global Reordering and Why It Matters, would be the theme. Let's just jump right in. And what do we mean by the global reordering?
Right.
What are some of the major features?
Well, first, I just wanted to thank you, Dr. Stahauer, and President McDonald, and Northwood, Stevens, and everyone who's listening. It's really an honor to be here, and it's kind of remarkable to be on a stage with Milton and Rose Freeman sitting behind you. I actually published the last op-ed that Milton Friedman ever penned. It was titled Hong Kong Wrong. It was actually back, I believe, 2009, 2010, when the deterioration of Hong Kong's freedoms was actually starting. It was starting way back when, and he saw that. So thank you for having me. It's a great honor.
This is your kind of place.
Yeah, it is my kind of place. Also to have an American flag, which is wonderful. Don't see much of those these days on campuses. So the global reordering, what do we mean by that? Essentially, and I tell this to clients a lot, none of you really had to care about politics, policy, foreign policy for a great many years. And actually for many owners, for your entire business career because you had basic stability. You wanted to manufacture in Mexico, you wanted to import parts from China, that's fine. You didn't really have to think too hard about that situation changing, but in effect, it was a holiday from history. That post-Cold War era was never reality. And I think one of the things that we understood at a fundamental level in the last administration is that actually the United States of America has always had conflict. And we've always had real enemies, state enemies. 9/11, in a way, distracted us from the reality of the world. And so what you're seeing now is simply a reemergence of what was already there, which is the fact that we have state actors. And unlike the Cold War era that you studied, Dr. Stahauer, it's multiple actors. You have an emerging block of countries that are all cooperating with one another, sharing intelligence, trading with one another. And so the global reordering, to close, I don't want to talk for too long, is the emergence of blocks of nations that will separate from one another, that will trade with one another. So I'm talking about the China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, North Koreas of the world versus the United States, NATO, Australasia, our allies in the Pacific. And then you'll have a great many nations stuck in the middle who will play both sides, like Saudi Arabia, like Turkey, like Brazil, for instance. And so what we're going to see, and I don't think that this is set yet, but we're in the middle of this transition to this new period. And the way that it all plays out is in large part going to depend, I think, on US leadership and the role that we decide to play in the world. And that's not set yet. That's actually a great debate that we're having. Maybe I'll end there.
Well, and so that actually, there are so many directions we could go there. There's this vacillation in the United States between isolationism and our role in the world. Maybe you could speak to that because that becomes very pertinent these days.
Well, nothing is ever static in politics, as you all know, and we've seen this rather remarkable reversal. Whereas the Republicans used to be the party of small government and a strong defense, well, Democrats have never been really the party of small government, and that will never change. But they have taken the mantle of being more of an internationalist party in a way that Republicans used to be. Now, that isn't true of all members. It is hard to generalize. Both parties are big tents. But for the first time in a long time, we're seeing American engagement in the world be an issue in our politics. And it certainly will be an issue in this election, because what we've witnessed is the retreat of American leadership, but we've also witnessed a great erosion in US deterrence. And this was something I used to talk a lot to the secretary about. He would say things to me like, Mary, please go inflict pain on this country. We need it to do something for us. So I'd have to go back to the office and say, well, okay, how do I do that? What are the pressure points? How do we gain leverage? Or how do we use diplomatic tools to get them on our side? We had deterrence in that administration. People were afraid of us. They're not afraid of us anymore. Whether it's the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which we tried to do, but we couldn't get out in a safe way, so we didn't do it. Whether it was the launch into Syria after Assad used chemical weapons. I mean, there are many examples. The maximum pressure campaign on Iran, that's gone. People just aren't afraid of us anymore, and unfortunately, that's created a very scary and dangerous situation in the world today. So that's why you see Putin moving into Ukraine. That's why you see Iran proxies in Israel. I'm not answering your question.
That's very good. And in fact, it's a great segue into, you mentioned in passing reference to the presidential elections coming up. What's at stake there from a foreign policy standpoint? And is it going to come into play or not? Because we know Americans' voter behavior tends to focus more on the domestic situation. But I think you can probably draw a line of sight from the global situation to the domestic.
Certainly, and President McDonald talked about the rather strange situation that we find ourselves in. We're not only in a transitional situation abroad with the reordering of the world, we're transitioning through one of the greatest expansions and adventurism of fiscal and monetary policy in our modern history. And we don't know the impact that this is having on consumer behavior, on our productivity, on our prospects for growth, on inflation, right? We're working through this. I think what we're finding is we're coming out of this expansionism looking a lot more like a European economy than the US economy of old. We're looking at a 2-3% growth rate. We're looking at, a lot of workers who have dropped out of the workforce. We need to return to the kind of smaller government, light touch regulation that Northwood stands for if you want to reinvigorate the US economy. We are a very strong, dynamic economy. It's actually remarkable the way that we've powered ahead versus our competitors in, say, the OECD in the last, since, let's just say, post-COVID. But this election will have a major impact on the direction of our domestic economy as well as our foreign policy. And it's something that we're not really focused on because this election has been mostly to date about personality. And it really hasn't been about policy. But one of the things I've been telling clients is you got to focus on the policy differential, because if you think that the regulatory burden or, say, the unfair advantages that are being given to labor unions by fiat, by things like the National Labor Relations Board, if you don't like that now, just wait until a second term. And you will face a drastically different tax environment, regulatory environment. It's really going to be different. And it's unfortunately not something we're discussing here, but I think that it's something that if you're running your own business that you have to be cognizant of.
So translating the geopolitical situation into what it means for the U.S. business climate as you're heading towards that, and then specifically the automotive and mobility sector. What are your thoughts there?
Right. Well, I think there are a couple of interesting examples. I'll talk maybe briefly about China, if that's okay with you all. So all of you in the room have seen the U.S. government's pitch for electric vehicles and all of the taxpayer subsidies. I mean, my dad went out and bought a Polestar, which now he hates, but he went out because of the subsidy. He's a CPA, and he said, well, that's a great deal. The government's going to give me money. I'll go buy one. I'll even put a charging station in the garage. Regrets it to this day. There's no resale value, but you all know that. Poor Greg. So we've seen how government can redirect capital in your industry. But the other thing that is happening is, and I'll talk specifically about China, is that China is really only an export market. This idea that somehow it was a capitalist economy or that they were embracing the tenets of free market capitalism is all nonsense. It has none of those characteristics. There's no private property. There's no independent boards of directors. There's no third parties, right? Media or other sort of firms that would be looking at. No, it's not. It's an export machine. And it's a machine that is failing because it's a deeply corrupt society. It's top down. So they're going to have to generate exports. So what are they going to do? They're going to dump cheaply made goods, particularly electric vehicles, onto Western markets. So this is hitting Europe right now. It's creating a huge uproar. Europe doesn't know what to do. They don't want to cut off relations because, again, we're in a transitional period. They haven't quite accepted, nor have we, that this is an adversarial state, right? They just don't get that yet. So what happened? You had German Chancellor Scholz go to Beijing and with his unofficial cabinet, which are the car companies. I mean, Germany is, in some respects, a car manufacturer with a government attached. And he said, that was a joke, and he said, let's do a data sharing agreement with Chinese electric vehicle makers. Now, this is the height of naivete. First of all, you're going to share data with a country that is also a surveillance state and an enemy of yours. But secondly, you're going to give them any kind of innovative IT and give them your trade secrets and all the rest. It's just going to take them. So why would you do that as a normal, rational human being? Well, you're going to do that because you've still got part of corporate Germany that's making money off of business in China that's invested a lot of sunk capital. They don't want to get out. And so do we have that problem here in the United States? Well, we will to a degree. I mean, I already see Chinese electric car companies in Texas. I passed a dealership on the way to Costco the other day. Will it be to the extent of Europe? No, because we have more innovative and established domestic car makers. But that dumping is going to be an issue.
And for students, could you define dumping? Because that is a very specific economic term.
Right. Well, at the editorial board, we hated it because dumping is really anything government defines it to be. So if you're a domestic manufacturer and you can't compete and you produce a lousy product, what you do is you go to the International Trade Commission in Washington, you say, I need protection. This Japanese car maker, he's dumping into my markets. He's selling at a lower cost. He's undercutting me. That's not fair. Let's have a case. And then you always win at the ITC. So it's an incredible court. It's like the Singaporean court, and you have a political case. You always lose, right? That was not a joke. I once got sued by Singapore, although we love Singapore now. They're a great partner and ally. But in any event, so I think you'll see that undercutting of costs and potential inflow from places like China. I also think that as you've started to see the United States government, and this is bipartisan, by the way, which is wonderful, you've seen us start to protect strategic industries like semiconductors, for instance. That's a slow process, but that trajectory is not going to change. We have certain innovations in the United States and certain products that we need to have secure supplies of. So whether it's semiconductors, whether it's pharmaceutical inputs, or other types of products, China's behavior is not going to get better because the nature of the regime is what it is. So we can pretend that it's something different, but they are constantly going to try to bully, provoke, and expand. That's not going to change. So I would anticipate that you would see further restrictions on imports of things like semiconductors, or exports rather, to China. And that will create trade tensions that may affect parts of your industry. I don't anticipate that it would impact, say, the import of nails or T-shirts. I don't think this process is going to happen overnight. It's just simply ridiculous to say that we're going to decouple. That's just nonsense. It's not possible, short of a war, which we could get into. But in the meantime, before we get there, I do think that you will increasingly see that divergence, and it's going to start in those strategic industries that increasingly automobiles are becoming part of because of all of the technology that's stuffed into them.
So you mentioned war. And in our preparation, we talked about how the last war does not predict what the next war will look like.
Right.
Could you speak to that a little bit?
Right.
And what we might anticipate the next war, big war that the U.S. could get involved with?
Well, we don't want war, which is why we need U.S. deterrence, because the best protection against war is to have a strong offense and to instill fear in your enemies. So I'll just say that up front. I'm not a warmonger. And I'm also not a paranoiac, although you might think so after what I'm about to say. So you're right, Doctor. I think we always miss the next threat because we look at the last one and we're not anticipating the future threat. It is true that America has been very blessed and that we've always fought wars overseas, and we've never really, except for Pearl Harbor and 9/11 to extent, although that wasn't against a state actor, and I actually don't think was an existential threat to the United States in hindsight. We've always felt very protected and very secure. One of the first things I did when I started the State Department job was to go get briefed and to get daily briefings on what was going on, not just externally, but internally here in the United States. And what I was surprised but not shocked to find is because we are such an open society, we are inherently vulnerable. But you layer on top of that the amount of integration and, frankly, naivete that we've had, bringing in people from adversarial states, training them in our universities, giving them tools to do things like build nuclear weapons or certain kinds of materials or chemical weapons, biological chemical weapons. We've trained all of these people here, and many of them went back to places like China and Iran and Russia. So unfortunately, we're only now waking up to that. But because of our interconnectivity, particularly because of the internet, our critical infrastructure, when I talk to people, friends in the intelligence community, DOD and elsewhere, it is code red on the security of our critical infrastructure. It's deeply vulnerable, deeply, deeply, deeply vulnerable. And it's because you'll have small local, say, water operators, right, who have just lousy security on their IT systems. And so, again, the lumbering US federal government has not really awakened to how significant this threat is. I'll give you another example. We had, I don't know if you all saw, we closed down the Chinese consulate in Houston a couple of years ago, and then they went on the roof and they burned all this stuff on the roof. Did anybody see that? We loved that. We thought that was very funny. It was like the Pope, white smoke coming up. They had nothing to hide, but they were burning it all anyway. Well, the reason we closed that consulate is because we had a lot of operatives who were in and around the medical facilities, the space research facilities in Houston doing things that they shouldn't have done. We just let this happen. So if you believe, last thing I'll say before you really do think that I'm completely paranoid, but if you believe that 9/11 redirected the entire infrastructure of US national security to 300 guys in Afghanistan in caves for more than 20 years, that's what we focused on. That's what we focused our intelligence collection on. All of our DOD thinking was, how do we get these 300 guys in the caves in Afghanistan? And we completely missed, right, the intent of the Chinas of the world. Well, they were just sending a lot of people into this country where they sit today. Now, I'm not suggesting that there's going to be some sort of crazy uprising or anything like that, but what I'm saying is they have the tools. They attack our satellites every day, that's public. They attack our cables underseas. They attack us in cyberspace every day and steal a lot of our stuff and personal information. What is that a practice for in space, cyber, and under the ocean? It's a practice for cutting us off. And so I believe, just my theory, that if you just look at the evidence, that's what's going to happen. And so I think, you know, when you think about your businesses, and it's something we think about a lot, for instance, at the XO companies, you know, that cyber protection is important for every business. But you also need, you know, some connectivity there with law enforcement, with intel, right, to really understand. And you might think, I'm not important enough. That's nonsense. Yes, you are. If you're running businesses that are more than $5-10 million, you're important. They care about you. You're not a nobody. You're a target. So I wouldn't suggest anybody go to China. It's not safe. You should never go there. And you need to prepare and secure your businesses here at home as well as think about, okay, where am I getting my supplies from? Who am I hiring? How am I vetting? All of those things. Sorry, that was a long answer.
That was a great answer. Thank you. And chilling as well. Shifting gears a bit, I know our students are interested in how you've achieved your professional success. And you rose to the very top of the State Department, Wall Street Journal. What could you tell our students as they're entering their careers?
Fail early. I failed early in my career. I know we have a gentleman in the audience who's a Goldman Sachs alum. I too am a Goldman Sachs alum, except I only lasted 3 years because I was miserable in fixed income and a total failure, which was a very sobering experience. But I think it's important. I think it's important to fail. Most successful people that I know, and by the way, I wasn't at the top of the State Department. That would have been the secretary. So I can't claim that, especially if somebody
Well,
sees,
you were his top
sees this.
advisor.
But yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate to work for him. But I think failure is deeply important. You have to take risk. And I did an enormous amount of cold calling. But prior to that, that failure said to me, I really need to figure out what I'm good at, because everyone knows innately what they are good at and what they're not good at. I am terrible at, figuring out debt financings for junk companies. I can't do it. It's not my thing. But what I was good at was I loved the ideas that America was founded on. I had strong values, which I think Northwood promotes, unlike almost any other university in the world. Extremely fortunate to be in a place like this. I loved to write. I loved to argue. I loved languages, and I loved going to really, crazy countries all over the world. I thought I should work for the journal editorial board, promoting American values and using all these skills. And once I figured that out, well, I had the characteristics, and I thought, well, I need to find a job that fits that. And that's when things started to go in the right direction. So I encourage everybody to do that kind of self-reflection. And then I started cold calling and begging them to talk to me. I called them for months until somebody picked up my call.
What kept you going?
Well, I was failing at Goldman Sachs, that's for sure. That's one thing, the fear of complete failure. And I also just innately knew that I'd be good at it. And I think if you love your industry, you love your business, sit down and think about why you love it. What is it that motivates you? Do you love getting out in front of customers? Do you love selling? Is it the tech of it? Is it, getting people around and you feel like you're moving America? I mean, what is it about what you do? You get up in the morning and you think, I can't wait to get up and do this. I can't wait to get up in the morning and talk. I mean, I spent a career explaining the rest of the world in a way to America. That's been my career. It's been a wonderful career. And I'm very fortunate that I can continue to do it at a place like Stevens for a family, that values that and that, has clients that want to talk about these things and sort through them. It's extremely fortunate.
So one question we always ask as part of this forum is, and it comes from our students, what advice would you give your younger self?
Oh gosh. Just to be honest with yourself about what it is that you can't do just as much as what you can. I think it's a rare person who can, decide to be do several different careers and be good at all of them. I just don't think that's true. I think you need real depth in what you do. And I think some folks are fortunate. They find it before others, or you grow up in a family business and you're exposed to it at a young age. I didn't have that privilege. I had to kind of figure it out. And that took a while. But I think anybody who has good, solid values, hard work, understands the value of freedom and granting freedom to others, somebody who's going to do well in this country. It's the greatest country on the face of the earth. We're all very fortunate to live here. And I think there's an enormous amount of opportunity in the United States for those who want to work hard and want to seize it.
Thank you for that. Information and making sense of information and making sense of data to create information and sharing it is at the core of what you do. How do you stay informed? What are some of your go-to resources that you go to every single day?
Yeah, I read I'm a little bit of a news junkie. I read all the time. I think the good news is that for you all, for your businesses, news is essentially commoditized now. I mean, you all know effectively what the quote unquote news is of the day that impacts you. What you don't have, I think, are a good aggregator for what your interests are. I think that's what platforms like, say, Substack are starting to become. They're going to be the more successful Apple News. So let's say you're interested in auto financing and you need to know what's going on at the Fed, but you need to follow the banking industry and need to follow your competitors. Eventually, I think the hope is that you'll have an individual news source. I read all kinds of things. I have to read all the big papers. I read Twitter as my news feed, or X rather. Thank you, Elon. I read individual Substacks just for the things that I care about. But you really can create a news feed. It takes some work because the killer app isn't there yet, but eventually one day it will be. But I think you have to go to a lot of different sources to be deeply informed in your area today, unfortunately.
Yes, and you mentioned multiple languages. Do you read some of these in other languages?
No. I've worked in many places and studied many languages, but I think you have to be like Stan here from Bulgaria, growing up in it to really claim competency.
And what routines could help our students with become and stay experts in whatever arena that they choose?
I think you have to, again, be in tune with what really interests you. If you're finding that you just love accounting classes and you can't wait to balance a ledger, I mean, you should really follow that instinct. America needs CPAs in a deep way, and you will always have a high-paying job, which is going to be amazing for you. And I just find that, we have these expectations that students are going to fit into categories, right? That, you must go be a lawyer or a consultant or things. America is an incredibly innovative, entrepreneurial place, as you know. So figure out what you're good at, get passionate about it, go out and get real world experience. I meet a lot of people who tell me that they love foreign policy, but they've never taken the opportunity to travel, try to work abroad, learn languages. Come on, get out there. So again, to the CPAs in the room, go do it, become the best. Figure out the firm that has the smartest accountants and go learn from them. Find a mentor. I mean, mentorship is extremely important, and it could be somebody down the hall from you at Northwood. It doesn't have to be some big famous person that can have a major impact on your life. So all those things.
Thank you. Shifting gears again.
No pun intended.
Yeah. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we became acutely aware of supply chain disruptions. And I know many of us had toilet paper anxiety and saw empty shelves for the first time in our lives. What are the geopolitical components of supply chain disruption that we still see today and should be still concerned about, or the potential for them?
Oh, I mean, look at what just happened in the Red Sea. I mean, who would have thought a year ago that we'd be talking about the Houthis? I mean, the Houthis, Iran-backed terror group in Yemen, have been around for years and years. In fact, that was actually one of my first briefings, was about what they were doing around the strait, because it's one of the most fundamental trade choke points in the world. It's like the waters off of Indonesia or the Taiwan Strait, where you have just enormous amounts of world trade going through these choke points. So why do we care about that and supply chains? Because now ships can't go through there unless they're Chinese or Russian. So we saw Lloyd's adjust its insurance prices. We're seeing longer lead times for goods. Could that happen again in a different part of the world? Yes, absolutely it could. And that's why I think this nearshoring trend is, again, it's like where we started our conversation. It's going to keep happening because the nature of the regimes in these choke point areas is not going to change for the better. That being said, I'm not a complete cynic. We have missed almost every major geopolitical change in the last 30 years. We did not predict the fall of the Soviet Union. We did not predict the Arab Spring. We did not predict the 2008 Iranian pro-freedom protests. We did not predict the recent pro-freedom protests in Cuba. We're terrible. We never see the good things that happen. We also don't promote them enough, but that's a separate story. So it could also be that you wake up tomorrow and Xi Jinping is dead, or if the Iranian people are out on the streets and this time they're successful. That can happen too. But I guess my message to you all and to clients is, when you're thinking about exposure in your business, it's not just about where rates are going to go. It's about much more than that. I don't pretend that what I do is key to every business. It's not, but it is a component of it. So think about your suppliers, where they're located, where are they getting their supplies from? Think about your IT systems. Think about where your cloud is located. All of these things create a risk profile that everyone should be aware of.
In recent news, Congress just authorized a $61 billion aid package. Will it have the intended effect?
Well, the question is, but the question is, what's the intended effect?
Yeah.
The United States has the capacity, has always had the capacity from the beginning of this conflict in Ukraine, for instance, to equip Kyiv to win. Always. We could get fighter jets into Ukraine in pieces under the darkness of night, set them up, put them back together, and have them flying. We can do that. We've chosen not to. Why have we chosen not to? Because the current administration has been deterred. They are afraid of provocation. They don't want.
So from deterring to being deterred.
Correct. And so Russia is deterring us. Iran is deterring us. Therefore, we're more than 2 years into the conflicts and we still haven't given them ATACMS, which would allow Ukraine to launch guided missiles 300 kilometers. And as a result of our lack of leadership, Germany has not given them Taurus missiles, which have a longer range. So what is the actual intended effect? The actual intended effect is to give them enough to say we're helping, but not actually to have them win. So what will $61 billion do for Ukraine? Well, first of all, it'll help U.S. industry because a large portion of it is going to replenishing our stockpiles. So that's good. But it's not going to help Ukraine win because that's not what we want. And I'm not saying that in any kind of judgmental way. I think you can be very sincere in your belief not to provoke. And it is a serious thing if you're the president of the United States and you're thinking about sacrificing human life. It's a big deal. And you don't really understand it until you have to do it. I mean, every day the secretary would first get his presidential daily brief, and then we would sit down as a leadership team and he would get briefed on all the threats to Americans around the world. It's a very serious thing. So I understand it, and I don't ascribe any bad motivations to the administration. What I am saying is that I think the policy that they're embarking on has always failed and will fail again, and that's going to make this world a much more fraught and chaotic and dangerous place, and it's going to make these trends that you're seeing even more inexorable, particularly the nearshoring trend.
And tying to that, in a recent interview that you did with John Batchelor of CBS, you mentioned that the Biden administration says no, and then those things happen globally. Right. Could you run through a list of things? Along those lines, because it's pretty striking.
It is striking, and again, I want to be fair because administrations also aren't always unanimous in the voices, right? There are hawks in the Biden team. There are a couple in the National Security Council who I know, one of whom actually just left to go teach at Georgetown, Rush Doshi, on China. But what was the message when they went into office? They said to Russia, have Nord Stream 2, please, hook Europe on your gas. Let's sit down and talk about things like missile defense. So what did Putin do? He tested. He sent troops to the Ukrainian border. We did nothing. And we said, well, a small incursion might be okay, as long as it's limited. Then he invaded. With Iran, he said, okay, let's try for the nuclear talks again. And we're going to lift maximum pressure campaign. And you go from $4 billion in capital reserves to something like 40, 50 billion. Well, in many respects, we funded October 7th because we lifted the sanctions. We gave them the money to pay those fighters to do those horrific things and invade Israel. It's just a fact. So are they deterred from us? No, they're not deterred. They're not afraid. And they've softened on China, but they can't soften too much because actually the vast machinery of the US government has awoken to the threat of China, which is great. It's great that it's bipartisan. These things shouldn't be partisan at all. So they can only really go so far with the outreach to Beijing. But you see that U.S. business has figured it out because FDI flows into China have absolutely cratered. The Beijing Forum for Investment, which usually got about 200 U.S. CEOs, only got a handful this year. I mean, that tells you everything that you need to know. Capital is leaving because capital understands the risk, even if the U.S. capital doesn't.
So we have a question from online.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Great segue. Do you believe Dr. Friedman would still advocate for free trade today with China, given their political and military desire to dominate the U.S. and global economies?
Right. So I was part of the journal editorial board for almost 15 years. It's this free market nirvana where you just promote free markets and free people all day long. You get into public fights. I mean, I may not look like a person who likes to fight, but wow, I do. And I really enjoyed it. I really riled up a lot of people, like in a lot of places. It was really fun. But they're free trade absolutists. And I think another awakening for me was when I got into the administration and I saw just how uneven the playing field is. Now, my former colleagues would say, Mary, it's okay. You don't need fair trade agreements. If you just unilaterally liberalize, like say New Zealand did in the 80s, you will reap the benefits of that. So we should just do that. It's fine if they take our stuff and, we're always going to outproduce, out-innovate, and we'll get cheaper goods. As a result, the average consumer will benefit. So let's just pull down all of those barriers. Do I love the protective mechanism of tariffs? No, I don't like them. They raise prices for consumers. I would prefer to see an offensive strategy to say, okay, we've got this we see this great, to go back to our theme, this great global reordering. How do we incent U.S. business to nearshore? What are the economic programs that we can put in place? I'm not talking about government handouts like we're doing to the semiconductor industry. What are the kind of pro-growth things that we could put into place? What if we had special economic zones for semiconductors, right? So instead of funneling them taxpayer money, right, we give them a conducive environment for investment, right? Unfortunately, there were, I think, a lot of folks in our administration who were actually Democrats who wanted to just spend government money. And it's, again, one of the ironies of having a big tent party, right? You can have kind of Reaganites like me on the tax side, coupled with sort of Silicon Valley Democrats coming out with very confused policies. But we have confused policies because we're in this transitional period. We're not clear yet. Even we didn't call Beijing an enemy. So how could we expect the Biden team to? We're not there yet. So we have this kind of muddle, and unfortunately, corporates have to figure that out. It's not illegal to import from there or have your supply chain there, but is it reasonable? Is it prudent? Those are the kinds of conversations that are going on now in boardrooms.
Thank you. Questions from the room?
Regarding the Chinese topic, Matthew and I were talking yesterday at dinner. Can you talk about kind of the probabilities, I guess I would use that word, of two scenarios? One, Chinese invading Taiwan, just as obviously it's front and center. But the second one, as it relates to the financial aspect of some of the things we discussed today, it just seems unreasonable that we are going to, we as a country are going to disallow the Chinese from entering this country with their B2B product simply because they hold $1 trillion in our treasuries. And Japan and the UK don't have the horsepower to absorb that. So it seems to me like we say we'll do it, right? But in the actuality of it is I'm not sure we will. So I guess talk about the probabilities and the financial aspect of the Chinese treasury relationship as well.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think anyone who gives you probabilities of when things will happen is just doing this. They don't know. Nobody knows. What we can do is we can look at past behavior, and we can look at rhetoric about future behavior. So I think we focus on a lot of fringe issues in the United States in our media as regards China. What I tell people you need to look at to understand their intent is really one thing, and that's the military. So what can we observe? First, the military is not about protecting the country, it's about propping up the party. That's why it's called the People's Liberation Army. It's not there to protect the Chinese people, it's there to protect the party. So as they have grown richer with our help, really our fundamental support, what have they done? They've built up the military. Let me give you a couple stats, and I will answer your financial question. 1 million-man army, world's largest navy. Soon they'll have the world's largest air force. Biological chemical weapons program. 400 nuclear weapons with an aim for about 1,500 within 10 years. Hypersonic missile technology that's better than ours. The capacity to take down our satellites. Right? How have they? So that's what they have. How have they used it as they have built it? They've only become more aggressive. Nobody remembers that China invaded Vietnam. They actually fired more ammunition at Vietnam than we did in the entire Vietnam War in the 80s. Nobody learns that history. So they've invaded Vietnam. They have attacked India. That happened while we were in office. They are constantly attacking, and I mean physically attacking. Now they're attacking the Philippines. They harass Japan. It's a long list. Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand. This is just their near abroad. It's a miracle that we haven't had a significant loss of life from some of the antics that they do. So they've built a military that is not built to protect them. The only goal of a military like that, given what they've produced, is to attack us. It's being custom built to attack us. That's what they've built. How have they used it? They've become more aggressive. How do they say they're going to use it in the future? They're very clear. They say, well, we are going to not just take Taiwan, we are going to become the preeminent power in the world. So I think we should believe them, because their behavior suggests that they are honest in what they want. So that's what they're building now financially. When you talk to kind of analysts on Wall Street, there are two themes they always talk about when they talk about China. They'll say, well, Mary, demographics, doom them. And it's just about demographics. And two, gosh, it's the U.S. Treasury supply. I mean, how could they ever do that? We could never get into a conflict with them. That assumes A, rationality, and two, it assumes a kind of strategic thinking that we possess, not them. I use a phrase a lot, and Dana, I know you've heard me say this before, strategic narcissism. It's like a disease in America. We always think it's about us, how we think, how we act, how we behave to predict others' behavior. Can't think that way. It's not about us. It's also about them, how they behave, what they want, and what they're willing to do. So you're right. Yeah, they own a lot of U.S. treasuries. Is that going to prevent something from happening that is core to the party's interest or to Xi Jinping's interest? No, it isn't. Because they don't value those things. They don't value economic growth. They don't value the well-being of their people. It's a totalitarian regime. So this is what I keep saying. I had this rule at the State Department. Actually, it was more like a diktat, which is we're going to use the same language. We're going to use truthful language when we talk about nations like this. So we're not going to call him President Xi Jinping. We're going to call him General Secretary, because that's what he is. We're not going to call it, Iran. It's an Islamic Republic of Iran. It's a revolutionary regime committed to revolution. We have to condition our people and our partners to understand what they're dealing with, and that's the nature of what we're dealing with. And we're waking up to it, but not fully, as our German friends have just shown us. I hope that answers your question. Yes.
Yeah, we haven't talked about Israel yet. I'll just speak up. Your latest thoughts on Israel? We've got the Iranian proxies. We've got Iran, whatever, flexing their muscles. We've got a real PR, what appears to be a growing PR problem for Israel on U.S. campuses and perhaps more broadly around the world. We've got the Israelis probably committed to their path. Where do you see this going? What needs to change? What could change? What worries you? What gives you hope?
I'll try to make it germane to this discussion, which is that markets aren't worried about a wider war. I mean, if it were, we wouldn't be seeing the recovery we saw on the New York Stock Exchange this week. So that's the good news. Israel faces an existential threat. So they will do whatever they need to do to protect their territory, period. Iran is committed to the extinction of the Jewish people, and they are committed to the expulsion of the United States from the Middle East. That will not stop. The greatest thing that could happen to the Middle East would be a free Iran. It would solve a lot of problems. It would be like a free Cuba in our hemisphere. I don't know if you know this, but the Cubans are behind all of the protests and the nastiness in our hemisphere. Pretty much. They prop up the Maduro regime in Venezuela. All the personal security is done by Cubans. All of the protests, Colombia, Bolivia, all that stuff, that's all Cubans. So they're the linchpin of nastiness in the Middle East. But I will tell you one great thing that we have learned from this conflict that isn't being talked about enough is that the Abraham Accords have held. So you would have thought that all the domestic political pressure in the Gulf and Saudi, et cetera, would have just dissolved those accords, but they haven't. And that tells you something really important. It tells you that these were strategic decisions made by the signatories of the Abraham Accords. And that's not changing. So I think it also means that a lot of that capital that has been flowing into the Gulf from India, from Europe, a lot of family offices there, from the United States is going to continue unless, God forbid, we see a bigger conflict. That's the only thing that could upend it. But I think that's a really positive takeaway and something that we should be focusing on a little more.
Well, unfortunately, our time is drawing to a close. So I have 2 lightning round questions
Okay.
for you.
Try to be fast.
If you take a look back on your life, who would you like to thank the most for getting you here today?
Oh, my parents.
Okay, and then
Nothing is possible without a supportive family.
yeah. What a blessing that is. And then at Northwood University, we focus on individual freedom and the personal responsibility that goes with it. And we know you're a champion of that as well. What is your call to action for the business community as we face a global reordering? What can we do?
You have to stand up for the principles that have allowed you to build such successful businesses. No one else is going to do it for you. If you don't, you're going to see outcomes like what just happened at VW in Tennessee, where now unionized. Now, VW didn't allow that because they thought it'd be a great thing for their business. They caved to pressure from Washington and the political class. And you can't do deals with those people. You can't. You have to stand up, advocate, argue for just the conditions that allow you to build businesses and to better human life. You have to. You can't rely on anybody else to do it, and don't be afraid. That's one of, I think, the great tragedies of modern day America is that government has grown so big. I think business leaders are afraid to speak up and tell the truth about what makes the American economy work and grow and have sustainable growth. So I guess that's my message. Don't be afraid.
Thank you so much, Mary Kissel.
you.
May we heed your call to action.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
And now to wrap things up, we have Eddie McNellis, a student studying automotive aftermarket management, and he's going to quickly give his student perspective on what you've covered today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stayhauer. And thank you, Mary, for coming to Northwood University and sharing your perspective on global politics and the impact of our business environment. As a student studying business, I was struck by the Northwood University and the impact of distinct conflicts that have on our business environment, supply chain, and ultimately our quality of life. Your accomplishments at the State Department inspire me to follow my dreams, and I know you're an inspiration to all of the students in attendance today. As I go into my career, I will always remember the things that you talked about today, whether it be cyber protection, to fail early, the hard work ethics that you have, building up your risk profile, and even standing up for what you believe in. So I'd like to thank you for sharing your wisdom and expertise in those areas.
Thank you.
It's very fun.
Northwood University's mission is to develop free enterprise leaders who drive global and economic and social progress. Thank you for being such a leader and helping us develop a more global perspective to lead personal responsibility and to make a difference in this world. So, Mary, to commemorate your serving as a guest for Northwood University's Leadership Insights, A View from the Helm, we do have a gift to show some appreciation for you. So, I guess without further ado, a little plaque. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Stayhauer,
Thank you so much.
I'm going to allow Joe to do the final wrap-ups, but there's a couple things I wanted to leave you with. The first one is 2 dates and then 2 thank yous. The first, picking up on Mary's comments around free markets. We have another mandatory book that we read every year at Northwood. It's called our OmniQuest program. A couple of years ago, we had Dr. Arthur Brooks, formerly the president and CEO of the American Enterprise Institute. One of his books, Love Your Enemies. We've had him to campus, and he's certainly a champion of free enterprise and free markets. And you know, one of the things that he left us with at Northwood and our students is when he asks, how is it during our pedigree in terms of this group, how is it that in our lifetime we have lifted up 2 billion people out of extreme poverty? And Dr. Brooks would say, was it the United Nations? Was it the World Economic Forum? Or was it the USAID? Was it one of these other global types of centralist organizations? And it wasn't. It was capitalism, democratic capitalism. And I share that with you because Dr. Brooks is coming back to campus as part of our President's Freedom Celebration on June 6th. And we would love to have you here for this. It's going to be a remarkable evening. I have the blessing to give kind of a state of the university, how we've been doing. We continue to live with no debt. We continue to grow. Our financials are strong and our enrollment is going up. So that's a great evening. It's a Thursday on June 6th. The second date that I would leave you with is for over half a century, we have held the Northwood University International Auto Show. It begins on Thursday, October the 3rd. You are welcome. We'll have tens of thousands of people on this campus. We'll showcase over 500 automobiles and aftermarket activity. And on Thursday, we're launching the Subaru of New England with the support of Ernie Bach and the Subaru of New England group, our first symposium. And Thomas Dole, the just retired president and CEO of Subaru, will be kicking that off with a number of other educational pieces. And it would be great to have you feel like you could want to be back on campus. The two thank yous. The thank you for all of you who have come here to spend time with us last night and again today. What a remarkable group you are. And to have you part of this university is really important to us. We rely on friends in order to spread our message. And my sense is that we have new friends here amongst all of you, and you're welcome back on this campus at any time. And the last thank you is this. I had my first leadership opportunity as about 15 or 16, and I was growing up in the rural part of Nova Scotia, and I became what was called a head lifeguard on the beaches of Nova Scotia. My dad said, the one thing you can do to make this successful is surround yourself with good people, and they got to be smarter than you. And I've always remembered that, and that has played itself out perfectly to be surrounded with the people of Stevens. And it has been just a wonderful experience for us. We've already started some discussions. We'll do our debrief next week or later this week. How do we extend this out even further? We would look forward to that. And so Joe, Matthew, your entire team, thank you for being here along this ride with us. So with that, final words are going to go to our friend Joe. And if you would, Joe, thank you very much.
I'll make this quick because I didn't prepare to say anything. But thanks to everyone at Northwood. So glad that the conversations started a few years ago have become a reality. I think this first event was a success. It's been great to see some old friends, meet a lot of new friends. Been great to have the students be a part of this. Thanks to Dean, Stephen, and Patrick for being a part of this. Really helped kind of expand the conversations beyond the norm when a group like this gets together. That's super helpful. Thanks to all the dealers that made a trip. You know, many of you are Northwood alums. Great to have you here and see the support that you have for this university. And you know, I think it also helped a lot with the conversations to make today more meaningful for sure. And just blessed to have Mary as a part of the team to help make this kind of thing a little bit more special, kind of step outside the box a little bit and talk about some things that are you know, more important, frankly, than you know, doing one deal or selling one car or whatever. But with that, yeah, I mean, a great couple of days. We'll work to see what we can do again, do it even better. the next time. And the last thing I would say, the Stevens team plans on being here for another 30 minutes or so. Would love to continue some of the conversations, but especially with the students. We wanted to be sure the students felt welcome to approach us, have some one-on-one conversations, and see if we can, continue to be helpful today as you, fulfill the goals of getting a little bit more out of this event. So thank you all. Safe travels.